Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Tea with Julia. The first tea since the summer, and I hope that in the intervening month you've had a productive time, an enjoyable time, and you haven't been stranded in a country or in quarantine, or indeed either you or your families have been unwell. It's very nice that you're all joining us today, and thank you very much for coming. As you know, I'm going to be talking to Dr
Zoé Whitley,
who is Director of Chisenhale Gallery, London, and previously Senior Curator at the Hayward Gallery, Southbank Centre. In 2019, she curated the Cathy Wilkes British Council Commission at the British Pavilion in the 58th La Biennale di Venezia. Prior to this, she was Curator, International Art at Tate Modern, where she co-curated with Mark Godfrey Tate Modern's acclaimed 2017 exhibition, Soul of a Nation, Art in the Age of Black Power, which is
Chisenhale was founded by artists who took a former veneer factory and brewery warehouse and transformed it into the gallery that we know and love today. So that same spirit, I think, of inventiveness and a kind of can-do attitude in the face of some challenging things is the attitude that we are taking to making sure we can continue to work with artists to show the best work we can and to do it in the best possible way.
Yes, I mean, it's an extraordinary institution. And I mean, really congratulations to you for being the incoming director and facing the challenges. As you rightly say, it's so unexpected. Everybody is really just trying, how do we negotiate this? And also working remotely and keeping the team together while you're building the team, you know, and your relationship with them. It's a very significant challenge, and we're going to talk about a new commission that I think you've already announced, but also your first exhibition. But before then, I wondered, from the perspective of being brought up in the US and now living in the UK for 2 decades, I think. I mean, has it, you know, the saying about this is a common, we got a common language, saying 2 nations divided by a common language. Do you feel that our differences are more apparent now, or do you think we really come closer together?
I never think about these types of things in binaries, I guess. I think that for a very long while, differences were papered over and not spoken about. But that didn't mean they didn't exist, or that there weren't very deep-seated prejudices that manifested themselves in all sorts of ways. And then if you were the person to acknowledge, you know, why weren't there any other Black people in the room, or, you know, why are there so few women, or whatever it might be, certainly from the points of view of disability, or kind of gender equity and the presentation of any alternatives to heteronormativity. I think all of these questions have always been live, but have primarily been borne by the people experiencing anything outside of a kind of dominant culture. And we're now much more at a place of, I think, having to have and address those really serious differences in ways that aren't necessarily comfortable for everybody, but should have been happening all along. So it's
Of course,
it's not that I think people are people. So we've always really been in this moment, but I think that the one thing that 2020 has really maybe accelerated for the better is a real holding to account of institutions and people, and actually saying that things can't be the way they always have been. And so there's some good things coming from that.
Very much so. I mean, from my generation, as a student at the Royal College and the painting school, you know, America was where it all happened. My gaze, all my fellow students' gaze was always to the US. And I think in addition to what you've just been saying, one of the interesting things is that it's become a more even kind of ground when there were really good artists coming up from the UK, and making an extraordinary contribution. And that really, and so that it's not so, in terms of the arts, it's not so always tilted over to the other side of the pond, as the saying goes. And that for me has been a very good thing.
Or even kind of certain regional specificities. I think, just to jump on that it's not only a conversation between London and New York, or New York and Paris, as was. I think that the ways in which so many of the most exciting curatorial practices are also like attuning us to what's happened in what we might think of in the global South that hasn't been a part of these conversations is also really important. But I certainly think that the spotlight has shifted from, thinking about an art center being in any one city or in any one set of studios.
And also technology has helped with that so hugely. And accessibility in ways that could have inconceivable really 20 years ago. And that's incredibly exciting. And one of the things that I was going to ask you is about your very important role in facilitating conversations about diversity and how that has changed. I mean, it feels like an Augean stable in a way. And although really great progress has been made, there's so much more to do.
Yeah, lots more to do.
Lots more to do. And but do you feel, from your perspective, that real progress is being made, or do you feel that we're really still not quite out of the starting blocks?
I guess it depends on what specific context we're speaking about. I think in terms of leadership opportunities for people of color, certainly in institutions, there's a very long way to go. And I think also there's some important questions to be asked about why some people have no interest in even filling those roles or even being part of the institutions that have perpetuated a certain status quo for so long. One of the most fascinating things for me, I guess, developing the research for Soul of a Nation, was hearing from the artists. So it's not like any of these issues that I've tried to address in, certainly in relation to their careers, a short amount of time. I couldn't do this work without it having been built on the work of many other people before. And I think that there are a really exciting younger generation of curators and arts professionals and arts activists doing the work now in ways that I continue to learn from, and are really pushing the boundaries in some fascinating ways, and aren't necessarily waiting for institutions to catch up with them, but are doing the work that needs to be done. I think a few of these podcasts now, I've given a shout out to Meg Olney, who's a curator at the ICA Philadelphia, and the program that she and a number of her colleagues put together, Art for Philadelphia. And they did it in 48 hours to raise money for bail bonds for activists that had been targeted by the police while they were protesting against anti-Black police brutality. And the number of artists who donated works to that, I think it's now on its 4th iteration, which is almost sold out. But wonderful, wonderful works happen through that project and continue to. So Sharon Lockhart was a part of it, Becky Suss, just so many fantastic people. But again, that was something where if the institution can't keep pace, that doesn't become a reason to not to do it. And actually, the communities of artists and art producers and the makers of things and the people who make things happen working together is really, really inspiring right now.
Yes, and it is. And it also is life affirming at a time when so much is in question. And is there anything equivalent happening in this country?
Oh, sure. I mean, Wolfgang Tillmans, there have been a lot of,
yes, of course,
people doing a lot of really excellent work through artists doing what they do best, making work or sharing works that they have, and trying to think about ways to almost use certain aspects of the art world against itself to positive ends. So if people will only give something because they want to get something back, then these these prints campaigns have been an absolutely phenomenal way of doing that, because you end up with beautiful artworks in your home and then supporting causes that matter to artists, and that also really create some positive momentum for social advancement.
Yes, and Wolfgang has got a long history of doing that. It's amazing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Zoe, I'm just going to remind all the listeners that who you are, which is, I mean, they know, I know very well, but at the beginning we weren't on our Instagram live program, we were on our testing program. So I'm very delighted this morning to be talking to Dr. Zoé Whitley, who's director of Chisenhale, about her work, both at Chisenhale, but also her very distinguished career to date. So I want to go back to 2007, when you curated. You really were a pioneer in curatorial terms. The Uncomfortable Truths exhibition at the V&A, an exhibition to mark the bicentenary of the British slave trade.
The abolition.
The abolition. I'm so sorry. Yeah. I'm so sorry. The abolition of the slave trade, to examine its traces in contemporary art and design. And in the intervening 13 years, have you seen, we've talked a little bit about the change, but it's something, do you have any plans at Chisenhale that you can talk about now, about the future?
Sure. I guess that's the thing. There are projects that really teach you so much. And I think that group exhibition, which was a series of interventions in and around the V&A. So depending on where people are in the world, the Victoria and Albert Museum is the UK's National Museum of Art and Design.
Yes.
And I think at that point in my, very early on, I was very interested in changing institutions from within, but I think in a lot of ways, not thinking about what the mechanics of exhibition making meant to speak to an audience. And so I basically had my back to the audience, kind of railing at the institution. And I think I learned so much from artists like Lubaina Hamid, who I first worked with in that context, and then I went on to do my PhD with her. But I think knowing how institutions can impose ways of doing things on artists that are inhibiting rather than enabling and generative is something that I guess I learned in real time through a project like that. And it helped me understand the kind of curator that I wanted to be, or how I wanted to work with artists. And that's really one of the things that I'm most excited about the context that Chisenhale provides, is because what it's always done is to work with artists in a meaningful way. Certainly very early on in the 1980s, there were group exhibitions happening, but very quickly what it established was a rhythm of working almost exclusively in solo presentations, usually working with an artist over a year or 2 year period. And Mandy, who's in your beautiful exhibition now, is one of the artists who is a Chisenhale alumna. And that way of providing critical friendship to an artist, of helping them achieve what to that date will be the most ambitious thing that they've created, is something that feels really important and necessary, because there are often very few opportunities to be supported and nurtured to make a new work from kind of concept to completion. So that way of not only developing and nurturing that, may only come along, say in this country with the Turbine Hall, or if you've got the international status to do something with Art Angel, who I absolutely love everything they do. But, that those opportunities can be so fleeting and, so like a huge chasm in terms of one's career, that it feels great to be able to be a part of that. So with Tao Wen Fan's project, that was a collaboration with sorry?
We're just going to get up. There we go.
Oh, yeah, there's a beautiful image of Tao's work. So the exhibition that will open on the 26th of September is called Becoming Alluvium, and it will feature a new film work, as well as a series of lacquer and silk paintings. Tao's practice is so poetic and asks very
beautiful.
important questions about the nature of our responsibilities to our environment. There you have a headless figure among these two tigers, and these watercolor drawings are animated in the course of the film.
Oh, beautiful.
So, and I think that that's something that I'm also very excited to honor, that we have had a program in place that has been displaced by COVID-19 and all of the upheavals of 2020. And we want to make sure that Tao's work is seen fully and can be appreciated as widely as possible. The same will be true for the artist Yu Ji in the new year, and Abbas Akavan. And then this time next autumn, we'll be kind of kickstarting the program that I'm in the process of putting together with new work by Ryndon Johnson. So it's a really exciting time to rethink what our space can be and who we can work with and how. So we're thrilled about it.
Well, congratulations. I was very pleased to read that you've already started your program, that you're already underway with that new commission. And I mean, I think it's important to say that Chisenhale's reputation is so outstanding that its scale, that it is without walls. It's known globally as a place where you see artists who are coming, whose work is developed, but is perhaps not widely known. And I've seen some extraordinary works there, and it does actually bring us to Mandy's work in the current exhibition at the gallery where I work, Gallery Judæus Ropac. And it's an exhibition called A Focus on Painting. I was asked by Judæus to curate a show on painting, and he was thinking that maybe 2 artists, possibly 3. And actually what we've got 4, and it's this extraordinary 18th century townhouse of the Bishop of Ely, and it's in the Mayfair. Everything about it is exceptionally grand. And there's something about putting contemporary art, which is what we show, and artists we represent in this context, that is both challenging, but also makes it very interesting. And of course, the work that we have in the show is of a domestic scale, large. I mean, Mandy's paintings are very large.
Yeah.
But I remember her work at Chisenhale very, very much, and going to see her studios on many occasions since then. And thinking about what she did at Chisenhale and what she's done now, can you see, in what way would you just describe the progression or the difference to what she's doing?
I really see a continuum, and everything's just moving in such a positively ambitious direction. I love the way that the flooring is treated in this context, that way of accreting references and layering them and thinking about painting in a way that is both highly subjective, but at the same time can bring in a host of different references. And so we as the viewer can be taken in so many different directions is, I think, a really powerful appeal to Mandy's way of working. But also she's got such a superlative technique, and really a very definitive signature in that way, the way that a whole range of imagery is able to be brought to bear into how she thinks compositionally.
Yes.
Always kind of refreshing and surprising.
Yes, and also I'm so pleased that we were able to do an installation. So one of the beautiful rooms in this building that that she's been able to and embraced it fully, so that it's a kind of immersive experience, even though she's not the only artist in the show. And then there's the work of Alvaro Barrington, who I'm sure that you're aware of, and this is a picture of his work in the hallway.
And I loved you did a tea with Julia with Alvaro, and it was fantastic. I think he has a very, how will I say, a particularly sensitive way of thinking about how his paintings hold a space. And so you mentioned the very grand and particular surroundings of Ely House, and that sense of, Alvaro's spoken about it before in terms of energy, not only the energy of the space, but the energy that each of us brings to bear as we come into a space. And so I think it's particularly rewarding for anyone who comes in to be able to spend time in real life, if they can, with his works, and to also think about this shift in scale, because I often think about his works being commanding because of the high saturation colors and the kind of very imposing scale, but they're just as effective on this much more intimate scale. And they managed to do the same thing, which I think is fantastic.
Yes, it's interesting because Rachel Jones, who's also in the show, whose work we'll come to in a minute, is she has one yellow painting on the wall, on a large wall in the gallery where she's showing, and it absolutely holds the wall in a way that is totally and utterly surprising. Yeah. And I love that idea of perception and how things can change. So on the face of it, you have no idea how immersive a work of art can be. Mm. This particular image, which is by Rachel, is actually one of the largest works in the show. She graduated from the Royal Academy Schools last year, which is at exactly the same stage of her career as it was when we first showed Alvaro, who I must, yes, which is really wonderful. And I just have to say, because Alvaro and I have worked very closely together. I like him enormously as a person, but also I'm a great admirer of his work. And we co-curated an exhibition called Artists I Steal From, which was the most gloriously life-enhancing experience. And one of the things that came out of that is that he is a really wonderful artist. I'm very fascinated about how he looks at art, and he talks about it so well, and you can have the most tremendous conversation with him. But he's also little known until that show, a really brilliant writer. And so anybody, the catalogue is now sold out, and I don't have one, which is ridiculous. But I mean, he wrote very generously the catalogue entries for every work in the show, and they're fantastic. So anybody who's got a catalogue, hang on to it and read it if you haven't already.
Or send one to Julia, and then send one to me too.
Exactly. Now then, this is a painting by Rachel, whose work, did you know her work before?
I did. So I'm aware of Rachel's practice, not only in painting, but also these kind of sculptural forms that relate to a history, or a very kind of complicated history of representations of Blackness within the art historical canon. Yes. And I didn't know her work from BA times when she studied at Glasgow, but I'm a huge admirer of kind of Glasgow as a city and as an artist city, and as a space where so many artists are able to really develop who and what they are and what they have to say. It's where Cathy Wilkes lives.
Yes.
And I think with seeing Rachel's work from the RA until now, I think there's been a very interesting development in terms of her use of gesture and these kind of very dense and opaque layering, so that the references aren't there nakedly for you to just pick up, but that there's something that you need to spend time with or want to uncover. And in that way, I think thinking about both the titles of her paintings and the compositions, I keep going back to thinking about her so much as a kind of worthy heir to someone like Mary Lovelace O'Neill in the United States.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thinking both in terms of a relationship between an identity and gender-based narrative, and this kind of playing around with figuration and kind of figuration at its margins, and then being able to use abstraction to kind of elaborate a lot of these issues that might otherwise, that we would be able to lay bare with a figure. But what she's able to do is to really use abstraction and color, and her way of thinking about how forms are balanced within the composition to really reflect the full complexity of what she's doing. And equally for people who are watching or listening, there's a really wonderful series that was in The Guardian about the 7 stages of an artist, I think it was called. And they profiled an artist in their 20s, one in their 30s, 40s, 50s, all the way to Paula Rego, who's now an octogenarian. We're
Yes.
lucky to have Paula's work. And it was Rachel who was speaking from the point of view of an artist in her 20s. Laura Pruvot is also written a wonderful text within that, a number of artists. And so it's very fascinating insight into how one's process evolves. And I think that that's the thing to keep in mind. We can often have an artist's signature, or, you know, you might say, oh, that looks like Mandy's work, or whatever it might be. But the fact that artists are always growing and changing, I think that one can have a certain set of references, but how they're elaborated keeps changing. And that in Rachel's painting practice, as we have here, is something that I think is already hugely accomplished and very, very interesting.
And also, in the short space of time since she left the Royal Academy to now, it's, from my perspective, progressed hugely. I mean, the representation has fallen away, but when you look at the work, there is a sense of something that you can't quite pin down. And of course, once you read the title, then it becomes much clearer. And they're very, very accomplished.
But if you were to zoom in on some of the paintings of like Robert Colescott or someone like that, I think there's some of that gestural energy as well.
Yes.
So I can't wait to see more.
Well, indeed, I know. It's very, very exciting. She's working on a new body of work. So I'm going to go and see her studio next week. And then the last artist well, not the last artist, but the fourth artist in the show is Donna Nelson, and who lives and works in Pennsylvania. And she is very interesting. Have you come across her work before?
I hadn't, no.
Well, she's extraordinary because firstly, she treats the canvas as an object, not all the time, but often. And this example she does. This is on a stand, but also for her, the front, the recto and verso are of equal importance. So this is visible in the exhibition, as there are four works by her, not all paintings, but 4 works by her. And you see this as you come up the stairs. And what is so incredibly inspiring is that to hear her talk about painting and her own work, she's as excited about going into the studio every day as you'd expect a young artist, you know, who just left art college, which I think is very, very thrilling. And Alvaro did the most beautiful Instagram to her, you know, citing her as an enormous influence. She's very modest and self-effacing, really. So it's wonderful that if she's getting this kind of recognition, which is so very important for her enormous contribution over many years. But one of the things that was fascinating to me is how incredibly active you are, in spite of taking on a new job, having a family, and you're not foregoing your curatorial role in any way at all, not only with new commissions being announced and everything else, but you're also working. Tell us about the additional projects you're doing, because where is it? Yes. You've got a very important exhibition about the work of Elijah Pierce, which you're also co-curating. So I want to ask you 2 things. One about Elijah Pierce and what your plans are, and also about your interest in co-curating, because obviously this is something that really you enjoy.
I do. So I feel very lucky that during my time at Tate, I made some, you know, lifelong, of course, colleagues, but also friends. And so a close friend of mine who is a phenomenal curator, Nancy Ierson, so the curator of Picasso 1932 and the Modigliani exhibition, among a number of others, is now the Gund family chief curator and deputy director at the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia.
Yes.
And we started talking about what it might be like to co-curate a show at the Barnes, and many of the questions that the Barnes Foundation raises or makes possible, because Albert Barnes's collection is so unique in that not only was he living with these works, but that works by Renoir and Gauguin or Rousseau would be alongside craft artworks or artifacts that may not have had a name associated with them. And this kind of collapse between what we think of as kind of mastery with a capital M, or the unknown, the self-taught, or the highly trained, meant nothing within the context of the art that Barnes appreciated.
Which was very pioneering of its time.
It really was. And so it allowed us to be able to look at the work of a virtuoso woodcarver, an African-American woodcarver named Elijah Pierce, who effectively was witness to the whole of the 20th century in the United States, received the highest possible accolade from the National Endowment of the Arts for his wood carving shortly before his passing in 1984. Having been born in the century prior, his own father had been enslaved. So there's real trajectory in the work to understanding how one might articulate an American experience. And it allowed us to also ask some questions about how work like this might be known or recognized, or the flip side, how it could be not seen or recognized, and how someone like Gauguin can be taught in our art history books, despite being self-taught. And yet, we never use those terms when we talk about Gauguin, or really even someone like, there are a number of figures, Rousseau. There are others that we could be thinking about in that same context, but other artists are only considered perhaps in the context of the quote-unquote outsider art or folk art. And we wanted to use the context to allow us to strip away some of those questions. So not replace the labels with new labels, but really to just get very excited about a fascinating woodcarver's work. And I just really enjoy working with other people. I think that's the best way to not only have one's own ideas challenged, but to have kind of complementary, really interesting synergies come out of it. I find that it's always better to have like two brains on something than one.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's one of the most wonderful things to have a common project, and to have conversations focused around that common project with an outcome in mind. You're talking about an exhibition, but it can be an exhibition that could be many things, but it's really, really, it is life enhancing. And I really wish you well with that. Now, we're about to run out of time, but I have a question which is not, it can be related to arts or maybe not. What are your greatest fears, either personally or professionally?
Oh.
I know, I'm so sorry. But you've only got a short amount of time to answer it, so you don't have to go into it.
So I can have a big existential crisis in the next 2 minutes.
Exactly.
Honestly, I think it has a lot to do with aligning ethics and actions. And it's been talked about very concisely and eloquently on Instagram accounts like Change the Museum. But I think we're in a very difficult moment, on a precipice really, between our ideals and reality. And I think that there are really difficult conversations to be had about, walking the talk. And so we are often, particularly as nonprofit making institutions, in challenging positions where we're wanting to appeal to philanthropically minded individuals about the work that we do, and to secure their much needed support, and hopefully in an ongoing way. But again, there's, I think, much more acute awareness of what can often be a misalignment between the structural issues that are facilitated by certain forms of wealth, and then going to those same sources for hoping to have cultural support. Anand Gurdahass has written a really fascinating book about this double bind called Winners Take All. And so, I guess I think a lot about that. Like, what does it mean to care about something and say you care about it, but how do you constantly put that into action in ways that aren't too compromising or, you know, at worst, just completely contradictory.
Yes. I think in all sorts of different ways, you've touched on one of the great challenges of our times. And we do, all of us, to a greater or lesser degree, really wrestle with those issues. And that's an incredibly good answer to a question, a very wide-ranging question. So, dear Zoe, thank you for your generosity. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for talking so wonderfully about so many things. And we will all celebrate you, your colleagues, your artists at Chisenhale, and look forward to seeing the programme as it unfolds. And it's bound to be an exciting one. So thank you again so very much indeed.
Oh, thank you so much. Can't wait to welcome you all to Chisenhale. Bye-bye now.
Bye. You can rewatch all the previous teas with me on the IGTV or our YouTube channel. The exhibition that Zoe and I have been talking about here at Gallery Judæus Ropac, which I curated, is titled A Focus on Painting and features the work of Alvaro Barrington, Mandy El Sayegh, Rachel Jones and Donna Nelson. It opened yesterday together with Oma, a solo presentation of the work of Oliver Beer. Tony Cragg's exhibition Inhabitants Sculpture also opened yesterday at our gallery in Paris, in the Marais, where Robert Wilson's exhibition will open tomorrow. Jean Création opens today at our gallery in Pantin. On view in Salzburg, our Salzburg gallery is Anselm Kiefer's exhibition for Walter von der Vogelwälder, and online we're presenting Alex Katz's Soup to Nuts, the Sao Paulo Biennale project. Next Saturday at 11 a.m. I will be having tea with Oliver Beer. I do hope you will join me, and I greatly look forward to seeing you then. Thanks so much for coming.